we could speak to people's minds with data, but if they're not going to listen, if they don't believe our data, then I think we have to speak through their heart, try to reach their hearts to try to build empathy between us. And so I think for people who don't believe Asian Americans experience racism, I think we try to first understand what's their perspective, why can't they believe how we're untreated, and then badly, and then just share personally, well, this is what I've experienced. This is what I've gone through. And as much as they just may dispute the numbers, they can't really dispute our personal experience of being shamed and hated, our personal experience of facing depression or fear for our elders. So hopefully, again, as we raise the voices of Asian Americans and talk about our pain and our hurt, people will develop empathy for us. And it's really not my responsibility to try to convince people if they don't want to be convinced.
Sure.
But I think the two ways, again, for us is to reach hearts and minds, and that's through data and through our stories. And so that's what I recommend. I recommend our Asian American community doing that, to do that. But Asian American racism isn't an Asian American issue. It's a national issue of violence and racism. It's other people's problem. Other people have to deal with their own hate. Other people have to deal with their implicit biases. Other people have to deal with their treatment of foreigners. And so it's not my responsibility to change people's problem. Historically in the US, we've been disenfranchised. We haven't been given a voice. So from the start in the 1850s, we weren't allowed to testify in courts. So we lost our voice before government. We weren't allowed to become naturalized, so we couldn't vote and weigh in on decisions. So we've been historically excluded, disenfranchised, put on the margins. And that's a different sense of voicelessness, of political voicelessness and being excluded from society. That's really shaped the Asian American community, right? If you've been excluded for centuries, why do you want to report to the police? Why should we complain? It's like, it doesn't work. Why bother? It's like, we're not getting heard. It's actually stupid to try to complain. It's like you're butting your head against a wall. So this whole notion of fighting for your rights and raising your voice, I think it's, in some ways, it's irrational because you're not going to get heard. You could fight back, but you're just a small minority who has no power. So,
as we close this conversation, are there other stories that that you would like to tell behind the numbers, behind behind the spike, behind the incidents that we may see on the news? Are there other stories that you want all of us to know and hear?
Yeah, the story, history's been repeating itself. So the story goes, disease comes, Asians get blamed for it, Asians get attacked for it, and Asians face racist policies for it. It happened during Chinese exclusion, it happened with SARS, it happened with the bubonic plague, it happened time and time again. But in every case, whenever Asian Americans experienced racism, we've always fought back. During Chinese exclusion, we filed thousands of court appeals. We launched a mass boycott. We engaged in civil disobedience. After Japanese American incarceration, the community won redress and reparations. After 9/11 Islamophobia, Muslims, South Asians, Arab Americans have won political office to fight for racial justice. And today the story is Asians are fighting back yet again. We're mobilizing against racism. We're not hapless victims to racism. We're not deaf and dumb foreigners. We do have a voice. We do have a desire to be treated like others. We do have a sense of solidarity to help everyone gain freedom and their rights. So I guess a story that I have would be, okay, here's a great one. Bawi Kung was a refugee from Burma who was shopping, and someone thought he was Chinese, even though he was from Burma, and slashed him and slashed his 2 kids. Those kids are now we could become racist ourselves. We could become anti-white. We can become anti-black. But Bawi instead breaks that cycle by forgiving and by holding the system accountable. And so that's the story I want to leave, is that there is an Asian American way to respond to racism that isn't fight or flight. It is to forgive and to hold the system accountable to make change, so that we could treat each other with empathy and with respect. So I think he's my hero. He's my model of how America could be.
And I think that's a great place for us to close this conversation. Dr. Jeung, thank you for joining me today. And to those of you listening, thanks. Go out and make a difference.